I would like to talk to you about business. It can feel like we're in a golden age of small business startups, but that isn't actually the case. The rate at which new businesses are being created has actually been steadily falling since the 1970s. And I would argue that one of the reasons for that is that big businesses have been getting even bigger, which brings us to our main topic tonight, corporate consolidation. Recent years have seen record highs for mergers and acquisitions. When a handful of companies coexist peacefully without much in the way of price competition, just look at airlines. In 2012, one airline executive told an industry conference, "Consolidation has allowed us to do things like ancillary revenues," which is jargon for all those fees that drive you fucking crazy. Now, American was the first major airline to charge you for your first checked bag back in 2008. And back then, people could not believe it. Most major airlines had followed American's lead, and it was essentially the industry standard. And it is easy for that to happen when there's only a handful of big players. In fact, since then, they've added and increased bag fees multiple times, often moving in tandem, which is how those fees have gone from generating around $540 million a year a decade ago to $4.2 billion now. And that is infuriating. Look, you may well be angry with the service you get from airlines, but thanks to consolidation, they don't really need to give a shit about what you think. And if you don't believe me, remember that awful video that went around earlier this year?
The shocking images of a passenger caught in a travel nightmare. A man visibly shaken as he's yanked and then dragged off a United jet by law enforcement, all after refusing to give up his seat.
Yeah, that is the most horrifying thing you can possibly see on an airplane, unless your in-flight movie is The Boss Baby. A movie that combines the unbearable smugness of Alec Baldwin with the unbearable smugness of a baby. Now, in the wake of that incident, people said it was a PR nightmare and there was talk on Twitter of boycotting United. The problem is, on certain routes, they're the only option. So a boycott is going to be pretty hard to pull off. And that is arguably why their CEO was later able to open his earnings call for that quarter by describing a period in which, I will remind you, a passenger had his teeth knocked out on one of United's planes like this.
Welcome to a terrific second quarter, strong financial results, and even more incredible operational results. And as we think about customers, I want to thank them for their continued loyalty and support. We continue to find new and better ways to service them and make them more comfortable on our airline.
And you know what? Is it really any wonder that their earnings stayed solid? United is sometimes the only way to get to where you are going, which actually explains their new slogan, "You want to fucking rollerblade to Houston? Shut up and get in." And when an industry gets too consolidated, any company trying to compete with them or survive in their supply chain can get crushed. Now, we all know about Amazon, Walmart, or Google, but there are less obvious examples of this too. Take eyewear. Now, if you go into a LensCrafters, you will see frames by brands like Prada, Dolce & Gabbana, Burberry, and Ralph Lauren, all of which, it turns out, are made by an Italian company called Luxottica, which incidentally also owns LensCrafters and Sunglass Hut and Pearl Vision, and runs Target Optical and Sears Optical. So what can happen when a smaller company goes up against them? Well, just ask Oakley.
Oakley was a big competitor, and they had a fight with Luxottica, and Luxottica basically said, "We're dropping you from our stores." And Oakley...
They refused to sell their glasses in their...
It was a dispute about pricing, and they dropped Oakley from the stores, and Oakley's stock price collapsed.
There were some issues between the two companies in the beginning of the 2000s, but both of them understood that it was better to go along. We merged with Oakley in 2007.
You bought
so we're
Oakley.
talking...
They tried to compete, and they lost, and then you bought them.
I understand your theory, but they understood that life was better together.
And there is one more victim of consolidation that you may not think about, and that is the products themselves. Because heavily consolidated industries can lose the incentive to innovate, and the best example of this may be the cable box beneath your TV. We seem to have forgotten how important antitrust is, and are now all being forced to live with the consequences. Because this issue affects almost everything you do. Angry at banks? Well, the industry is dominated by just these four. Frustrated with your health insurance provider? Odds are it's one of these. And if this whole story is infuriating you so much that you are yearning for the sweet escape of death, well, bad luck, because the casket industry is controlled by these three companies. Oh, and it gets even worse. The afterlife is actually controlled by one religion. I am not saying which one, but when you find out, you're going to be so mad.